other 14 municipalities as well, which is truly important. So I'll hand it over to Tanya to talk about the RFPs and the timelines and some of the work that we're doing.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks everybody for having me. It's nice to be back. So next up, just talking about our visual identity and website. We've flown a little under the radar recently, but I'm proud to say that our website will be up and running next week. And as Mark said, we are out in the public and with our partners, continuing to figure out how to collaborate and start to develop this plan in a really, I'll use the word again, collaborative way. So that'll happen. So the province, why the regional transportation plan? Why the JRTA right now? So as we know, the province has seen significant growth over the last number of years, and the province has also set aggressive growth targets and climate targets, and so have some of the surrounding municipalities, including HRM. But to hit those population and climate targets, and to improve the well-being of our residents, and to grow sustainably, we need to do things differently and in a manner that is less car-centric. And that is no different than what I've talked about over the years while I was here at HRM. All of these areas, housing, health, land use, transportation, we need them to be integrated and we need them to be working together. Taking that multi-purpose approach to planning and infrastructure and the decision-making so that we can maximize the investment that we all have, which is often limited, especially as we grow, to try and figure out how we can do this together. So that we can really think about how land use specifically and transportation go. We often say that a best transportation plan is a land use plan and vice versa. So I think this is our opportunity to really think about this from a regional perspective. So the purpose of the plan is really, like I said, that coordinated and strategic vision for a regional plan, and not just HRM, but that surrounding area that Mark had talked about. And so the figure on this slide shows what that area, that initial study area is. And as Mark described, it goes to Truro and to Kings County and to Chester and Lunenburg. And when we say regional transportation system, we really are talking about those major corridors, the infrastructure that moves a large volume of people and goods. So highways and arterials and collector roadways, major bridges, key active transportation corridors, good movement corridors, rail corridors, all of those things that will make up this. And really thinking, like I said, around how do we maximize the impact of our strategic investment through cost-sharing opportunities in order to have the ability to secure federal funding together. So when we talk about the planning framework, it really is. It has three kind of core components. The middle is HDR, and that's our consultant that we've hired through an RFP program, or an RFP to do our transportation planning. So that's our mandate, is to develop a regional transportation plan by November 2024. And in partnership with the transportation consultants that are doing that plan, we've hired WSP and Believe Co. that will help support them in a communications and engagement strategy to help get out there, talk to the public. It's a large study area, as you can appreciate, so trying to figure out how best do we engage the public and businesses and the community and all of our partners in it. And then there's WSP and the University of Toronto. So HRM has a regional transportation model that looks at HRM specifically. We are working in conjunction with that team to build upon that model and to help us inform the regional transportation plan based on evidence and data. So I think it's important to know that HDR is our lead transportation firm, and they're well recognized nationally, and I'll get into some of the work that they've done. But they also have a local presence. So CBCL is part of their team, and Upland, as well as Alta and Dylan from their Ottawa offices. So the firm brings a global perspective, but with a local understanding, which was important to us as a team when we were reviewing the RFPs. So HDR's experience, like I said, they are a national leader in regional transportation planning. They're working on the Greater Golden Horseshoe in Ontario. They've done Destination 2040 at Moncton. They've worked on the Edmonton Transportation Master Plan. And one of the things that's important to note, I think, is that they've worked with city centers, like with respect to the Edmonton project, which included the city of Edmonton, but also the 13 surrounding municipalities. And they've also worked with First Nations groups and Nova Scotian groups and, those types of things to bring a very diverse and inclusive plan together. So I'd be remiss if I didn't touch on, there's been a lot of really good work done to date. So we're not reinventing the wheel. The work that's done, so we're going to base it, and kind of that basis is on the work that HRM has done, the work that other municipalities and our partners like the port and the airport have done already, and take that information and build upon it to grow, because we need to think about what those base plans are and then grow them to 2060 and beyond. So the project schedule is tight. As Mark alluded to, we're to have a master plan or a regional transportation plan by November 2024. And so we are looking to speed through that, but all of our consultants are on board and working hard. And we anticipate being out for our first round of public engagement starting the middle of May and into June. So stay tuned for that as we start to get out into the public. And so my time is up.
Give you 30 seconds to wrap up due to many technical issues getting here.
No problem. Next steps, like I said, I have 2 slides left, so it was like almost perfect. So next steps are really that first round of engagement. So getting out and talking at a regional level about regional transportation issues and concerns, and really talking about and continuing to build the awareness of the Joint Regional Transportation Agency, because it is, like Mark said, a very collaborative approach to transportation and how we will grow as a region. And that's that. Happy to take any questions.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Tanya, we have a list starting to grow over here, so on a day like today, I wouldn't be surprised. I think that because of that, unless there's any objections, we'll go to Councillor Outthid first.
Yeah, that's fine. We're all here, but thank you, Chair. Well, first of all, I'm really happy that this has happened. It's been talked about a long time and advocated for a long time, and I'm also very happy about the people involved, Tanya and you, Mr. Peck, and of course, Peter. And also the consultants that you're using. So I'm viewing this as a good news thing. I'm viewing it also, and I'd like to get your feedback on this after I go through a few things here. That's a big region. And that's a region that takes in car and truck dependency and an area that takes in, as Tanya said, areas such as I represent, and certainly some of the colleagues around the table represent, that is trying to be less car dependent. So you've got some pretty disparate groups there and opinions that you're going to run into when you start doing this, public consultation. I need to get downtown faster on business in my F-150 versus I never want to see an F-150 again. I want everybody to walk, BRT, ferry, or whatever to work. So it's going to be interesting. And I hope the group will be supportive of things in addition to obviously what need to happen to move goods and to move folks from the rural areas, but things like our planned ferries, BRT. I'm still saying someday rail. It'll have to be LRT maybe someday now because we couldn't come to a deal with CN and VIA. But the long-term vision of when Halifax HRM gets to that 750,000 to 1 million population, that is when cities that I've lived in and visited started really changing things. And BRT hopefully becomes LRT maybe someday, et cetera, et cetera. So you've got, so I'd like to understand a little bit where you get down into the weeds as well. So the big picture things, we want to move safely, we want to move faster, we want to move greenly, we want to, this sort of thing. But where do you get into things like you and I've talked about for so many years, Tanya, the Dartmouth Road and Magazine Hill, for example, when the Burnside-Bedford connector is open? What opportunities does that open for us to take over that road, light it, have bus lanes, have bike lanes? How involved are you going to be in the two, just in my district, antiquated interchanges that cannot handle the volume that they are getting now? So Hammonds Plains Road and the 102, the Bedford Highway 102, 101 interchange, which the merging lanes aren't, I think were designed when we had horse and buggy. These sorts of things, because while we want to be less car dependent, people needing their vehicles isn't going to disappear. And then how do you, and I guess you answered this before I came, but what is the empowerment of the group, if you will, to say this is what needs to be done, this is what it's going to cost, this is what we've got to do, even though there are going to be some growing pains. I used to tease Paul LaFleche about how he thought that if we just put an extra lane on the By High and an extra lane through Bears Road, all our problems would be over. And now I said, I used to tease about this. I like Paul very much. But, it's so much more than that. But people coming here to go to the hospital from Stewiacke or Bridgewater or something are going to want to see that. So how are you going to deal with these disparate groups, and what sort of empowerment are you going to have, both big picture and little picture, I would say, like this interchange is a disaster, we need ferries, we need BRT.
Thank you, Council. Am I good? Okay, thank you, Councilor Airhead. I'll take the less weedy part of the response. How's that sound?
Fair enough.
And I'll give the weedy part to Tanya to
that's good.
discuss.
She's familiar with my questions.
Yeah, no, exactly. So I think what's really important in this exercise is to do the proper research. Yeah. And we've hired the best, I would say the best in North America, to help lead us in the development of a regional transportation plan. The Act defines it as a master transportation plan. Part of that is to look at the existing data. So the one thing that we're not going to do is to dismiss the existing work that's been done throughout this region. So the Integrated Mobility Plan is a great example of work that's been well done. Yep. The work that HRM is underway with in terms of the Windsor Street Exchange. Yep. The Robie Street corridor is an example. They're pieces of work that will form part of this exercise. But what we really need to do is to rely on the expertise of those that are in the business to present us with what those options are and what a plan looks like. One of the important parts of developing this plan will be public engagement. And we will be starting on public engagement, I would say probably end of May. So we've hired WSP to help us with that. And there'll be 3 phases to that as we undergo developing that plan. So I think what's really important is that we develop a strategy that's based on evidence. And Tanya will talk about the change from point to point to travel demand modeling and how that will play a role in terms of looking at the movement of goods, the movement of people. I'm with you. I often bike the Bedford Highway because I don't want to drive the Bedford Highway.
Well, you're a brave man.
Well, I'm not as brave as some folks in this room, but yeah, it can be a challenge. But yeah, we have to look at what the broader picture is, and what's really important as well is bringing in those other 14 municipalities, because it's one thing to solve the transportation issues in HRM. But it's the feed in and the feed out that's equally as important.
Yeah, exactly.
So, look, it's got to be based on evidence. Part of the strategy will be an implementation plan. There'll be costs associated with that. Okay. Look, without having the crystal ball in front of me to know what that will look like, my guess is that it will have to be a phased approach. Mm-hmm. It's likely going to be costly. Mm-hmm. But there, too, is the importance of partnership, collaboration between municipal government, provincial government, and federal government. It has to be done collaboratively. Yeah. So that's kind of the high piece. I'll let Tanya delve into the weedy part.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through to the councillor. I think Mark touched on a whole lot of it. I think it is big. It is exciting. It's a great opportunity to figure out that those pieces of where kind of rural and suburban meet urban, and figure out where those kind of challenging pieces are. I would say, it's not one size fits all. So rail won't find the solution to everything, and AT won't find the solution to everything. It is about a kind of a multi-pronged approach to it, because even within HRM, it's different in different jurisdictions. So, and I think the exciting part about it is around the collaboration between the province and the municipalities and the other municipal units and the port and the airport and the Bridge Commission. So I don't have a good answer to how we're going to fix all of the things, but I think it's important to note that it's on the table for us to look at, and if we kind of come together to work through it together, we can find a solution, but it won't just be, well, it all has to be this and it all has to be that. It will have to be a bit more tailored. And I think, as Mark pointed, it's about, I've said this for years, we can develop a plan, but a plan is nothing without it knowing how you're going to operate it and knowing how you're going to implement it and how much it's going to cost and who's going to maintain it going forward. So it is about us creating a regional transportation plan, but then it's about seeing that long-term vision about how it gets implemented and who and how it operates after.
Just 10 seconds, I won't have to come back.
You're at 12 minutes, bud.
I won't come back, but, so are you looking at the Dartmouth Road? Are you looking at those interchanges? Do we need to tell you about those?
We're looking at things from a regional level.
Okay.
So if Dartmouth Road, with the new 107 going in, if that has an impact and a play, I think that there's something
All
there,
right.
for sure.
Thank you. I won't have to come back then. Thank you.
We'll go to Councillor Cuttle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much for this presentation. I think just being here today, giving this presentation at this point, kind of reflects some of the things you were talking about in terms of engaging, the municipalities that are involved in this and working closely with HRM, who makes up almost 50% of the geography, which you're looking at. So I think this partnership and collaboration is critically important to the success, and I look forward to more updates as we go along, because I think this is really valuable for all of us. We hear about evidence-based all the time, evidence-based, but I mean, decisions that are evidence-based are only as good as the evidence that's being collected, right? And so, the real starting point is always about the scope of work and, the things that are being considered to kind of lay the framework within which you're working. And so again, I think having that as a key pillar in your work and seeing it there in the document, that communication and engagement and having consultants who are focused on that is going to be so critically important. Because, you start to talk about land use and transit, and, that's kind of music to my ears because it is so closely tied. And when, we look at what we're doing in HRM right now around, we're finally going to start on our rural and suburban, plan reviews and looking at growth centers, looking at service hubs, which are kind of the foundational pieces that you need for a regional transit system. So, we know that we're doing that here, but when you talk about 14 other municipalities, that's a big question about how do you start to have those discussions about, best practice in land use and how that ties to transit, not just locally, but also in this regional context. So, there is a bit of, it's not just about the transportation, the corridors and the networks and the intersections. It's also, a little bit of the what if about lining up all these pieces that have kind of many external considerations and players, right? And bringing that together. So, I think from having some good leadership on this, it's not just about collecting the information, but also having, this vision and the leadership to, kind of bring it to fruition is really critically important. When you talk about the HRM, regional transit plan, I mean, we don't really have a regional transit plan. We have a transit boundary, and we have a transit plan within that boundary. But we have the vast majority of our municipality doesn't have a public transit system. And, while we have money that we use to help subsidize regional transit providers like Musco Riders or Bay Rides, and those are critically important, they're really based on a community's ability to organize themselves. And what this has done is left a real patchwork of rural and regional transit service with many, many gaps in between. And, I think this is becoming an important enough issue that we can't just leave it to community organizations to take the lead, that we have to take a lead as a municipality as well in how we fill those service gaps. That's just kind of my input on this, and I'm very excited, especially that you're coming back in 2024 with a plan. That's soon. That's next year. That's like, in terms of government speak, that's like lightning. That's great, and I hope I look forward to participating in any way I can in this, because it is a conversation that has been happening for a long time. I think back like 20 years ago with it's more than buses, right? And the work that was kept. The conversations that have been going on for a long, long time. So I think it would be important to try to see if you can capture some of that work that's already being done and some of that input, so that you're not starting with the consultation from zero. There has been, I think, some good thought put into it. But I guess my question would be about the rural areas, right? And it's the last mile. And so you have a regional transportation system that you're talking about, like a network of primary corridors. But then when I look at within those municipalities, about people getting to, supporting the transit use on those corridors, are you having that level of discussion in your consultations and engagement or in your scope of work about kind of the last mile, but in rural areas, it's really like the last 20 miles, about how you get people, like how people are going to get to this regional transportation system?
Thank you, Councillor Cuttle. I think the short answer to your question is yes, but I do want to add a degree of caution to that, in that if you look at the boundaries, so from Berwick in or from Kentville in, it's out of scope to say, how are we going to move people as part of this regional transportation plan from Harbourville into Berwick, into Windsor, into Halifax. So I think we want to be very careful in terms of we don't move into scope creep, but recognizing that within this boundary, there are areas that are rural in nature that will want to provide input into what a regional strategy looks like, a regional plan looks like, and as well considerations perhaps not within the, I will call it the greater strategy, but perhaps there's a sub-plan. So community transportation right now is important. Must go is critically important to residents. So, and that community transportation piece, that too will play a role into this. So, will there be considerations? Absolutely. That's part of the engagement piece, to hear what residents within the region want and expect. I think it's an opportunity for individuals to say, here's what we're expecting, or here's what we envision. And so often, every time I talk about what a regional transportation strategy looks like, the first thing that everybody goes to is rail. And rail may be one component of it, but what I will say, and I think the term may be multimodal, I think that's what this strategy will likely evolve to be. Whether rail's a component of it, I think it's a little early for me to say yay or nay to that. Let's see what the evidence, let's see what comes back from the experts. And a lot of what will come back from the experts will be based on what the residents within this region have to say and have to provide input. I think the other part that's really important too, and I've alluded to this, is you talked about the regional plan within HRM. I would say it's regional in nature, in that it's a regional municipality. Having said that, when council tasked staff to do a regional plan, they'll do it within the confines of HRM. That's what they're tasked with doing. What we're tasked with doing is moving beyond that, to take the work that's been done within that region and expand on it, and really develop a state-of-the-art transportation strategy that's going to move us into the future. The projections of 2 million by 2060 are real, and we see the growth in Halifax I thought I read something where Halifax is the first or second largest growing community in Canada. I've also talked to some of the experts in the transportation field that have said, you're doing this, now's the time. Don't look to this in 2060, do it now. And those are experts that have learned from the mistakes from other jurisdictions that didn't do that soon enough. So I think we're positioned well to look at what a regional transportation strategy will look like. So
Great. And I guess my point there is that it just needs to be integrated with what's happening in those other municipalities.
Absolutely.
So it works lock and step. Thank you so much.
Councillor Hensby.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I thought you let your committee members go first before I invite a guest.
Technically, the administrative order doesn't say that, so I don't do it.
Thank you. Appreciate this opportunity. Mr. Peck and Ms. Davis, good to see you here. I've been a long time waiting for this Regional Joint Transportation Authority to finally come into being. I was a member of the John Ham government when we first talked about it and stuff, and possibly bringing it forward back in 2000. And glad to see it finally come to fruition almost a quarter of a century later. But you talk about the rural community shed 1 hour distance. You just took our regional plan of rural commuter shed, which was a 45-minute radius from Hubbards to the core and out to Oyster Pond. Now you've expanded that to Ship Harbor. Just let you know the magnitude of the region you're going to have on the eastern region of Halifax. With that, the 107 highway, waiting for the Burnside connector to be done, and whatever twinning you're going to do from Burnside out towards the Port Wallace developments, towards the top end of Lake Loon, would be great to see, but I'm more concerned about the Cherrybrook bypass and twinning opportunities of the 107 highway currently between Lake Echo to Muscat Albert Harbor and beyond Muscat Albert Harbor. There's been a corridor view been acquired to do a bypass from the terminus to the 357 to the Myers Grant Road. So I'd like to know when you may be having those 100 series projects on the list for future consideration. I know the 103 is quite a bit of work there. You probably can't wait to get all that paved and opened up. So can't wait to see all that done. So basically we'll have from Halifax core to the Halifax western boundary completed by then, hopefully soon. Also, I think you guys should look at the consultants report we did back in 2007, the Rural Express Transit by Entra Consultants. I'm pretty sure some of you may be familiar with that. We need to have park and ride terminals at Martison Drive and Mount Uniacke on Highway 101. Highway 102, we need Elmsdale and Hants East. It'd be a great opportunity there for us to partner with the airport as well as the neighboring municipality. 103, we need park and rides at Ingrimport and Hubbard's interchanges. And on the 107, Mineville, Muscat Albert Harbor. Now, since you pushed the boundary out further, we must also include Hedgedore as park and ride terminals. And I think the province and the feds need to look at providing financial support, capital and operating for these services. And also, as a member of the Bridge Commission, I've always been an advocate for a third bridge at the south end of the peninsula. I hope you guys don't let that fall off the radar, because I think it's important to look at the movement of traffic. It'd be best to complete the circle. We have the circumferential highway all around the peninsula and everything else, but we don't have a south end exit. Everything that comes in comes out from the tide, from the north end, from the McKay, and from the mid-bridge at the McDonald. The south end bridge will have a full circular motion and opportunities for better exits, as well as it also eliminate the issue of the container trucks coming from the port, go straight across the bridge and on to the circumferential highway, avoiding downtown traffic altogether. So if the third bridge has become a reality, we need to look at preserving the corridor at a certain time in the future, and I think that authority can rest with you. And also, the Bridge Commission did put a few variable message boards on the various 100 series highways, the 103 and the 101 highway and the 102 highway. We don't have any on the 107 or the number 7 highway, so we need to have some variable message signboards on the eastern side of Halifax to direct truck traffic. So you may want to ask Tony Wright to brush off the old dynamic message machines or the variable message boards diagram they had on plans. They had at least 24 of them scattered across the core. And I think it'd be good to have, provide safe traffic information to our motoring public, as well as special for our truck roads. So I look forward to your deliberations, and I'll be following you closely. You might be hearing from me time and time again. Thank you.
Any comments? Where do you start?
Wow. Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, I think the third bridge has already been named to the Hensby Pass, I think is what it was called, but I'm not sure. Through the chair, thank you, Councillor Hensby. A lot of commentary that will likely form part. I do know, with your reference to the 100 Series Highway, I think we'd have to go back and look at the capital plan, the 5-year capital plan within Public Works that'll already have defined that work. Whether some of that work is defined within some of the pieces that you had said, I'm not quite sure. Look, a lot to take in terms of all those pieces that you'd referenced. And, you know, whether it's a bus rapid transit stop, whether it's a transit stop in Elmsdale, Enfield, Airport, Roby Street, that will all be part and parcel in terms of what this regional transportation strategy looks like. So without getting into, you know, attempting to respond to everything, look, thanks for the comments. I have them documented. Tanya has them documented. And at some particular point in time, I'm sure we'd love to come back and provide this committee with an update in terms of where we are from time to time. I think that would be really important as well, and we'd be more than willing to do that.
Thank you. We'll move to Vice Chair Lovelace.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for this presentation. It's great to see you here, not in a screen. I did appreciate the opportunity to have kind of an inside look there a month ago, I guess 6 weeks ago. Glad to have you here today. I'm going to ask you to dig a little deeper. So when you talk about the 5-year capital plan, I think that's not good enough. We need to look at the evolution of JRTA. I mean, we are talking about, what, 60, 70% of the population of Nova Scotia within this capital region, including all 14 municipalities. So, you know, that's a significant area, but I would think it actually needs to go up to the Nova Scotia-New Brunswick border, quite frankly, especially when we talk about that corridor and the economic development opportunities that come with having that transit and the movement of goods and people. And I just from that, you know, that kind of interconnectivity between land use, transit, health, well-being of communities, housing, all of those things are extremely important and interlinked with transit. You know, if you think about I'm just going to look at the stakeholder list, and I'm struggling a little bit with that stakeholder list, wondering, is ACOA your connection to Infrastructure Canada? I'm assuming they are, you know, but at the same time, we're looking at the importance of federal funds coming in to support some of these initiatives, like the Park and Ride in Elmsdale, for example. But I do think that Bill 61 is short-sighted. No problem saying that. I think we need to, again, look a little bit further and think about the evolution of what we're doing, not just the next 5 years. And with that, of course, is always the question in Hammonds Plains, what's going on with Highway 113? It is, you know, as you know, we've got the National Urban Park project with Parks Canada, and the province of Nova Scotia has invested in that. We're really excited to see that moving forward and hope that we're not you know, sidestepped by the development of this bypass highway. Now, economies of scale, I get. I think it's important to have those 14 municipalities, but I'm disappointed that you didn't mention First Nations communities, because there's like 6, 7 within that region. So are those considered within your stakeholders? Because I didn't see that in the presentation. You're nodding. Okay, good, because the linked economic development opportunities, transit, health and wellness, and so on for First Nations communities, reconciliation, and so on, really, really important when we're looking at that regional transportation demand model to make sure that they're in there. And the other thing I just wanted to ask you about before I went, I still have lots of time. I'm talking fast. I want to talk to you about, some of those regulatory issues. The modernization of the Public Highways Act, the fact that the province does not have an active transportation plan, and thinking about how do we, as a capital region, align with a provincial government that doesn't have some of these things, right? They're not thinking about highways from pedestrian safety or cycling safety when they slap up an 80-kilometer, minimum speed or maximum speed. And so the next step, of course, is looking at how do we modernize the Utility and Review Board to ensure that the regulations within the Utility and Review Board, the decisions that they're making, actually are benefiting this future model of transportation, active transportation, and evolution of thinking about transportation, and making sure that we're focused on transportation from an equity lens, and that people can rely on transportation no matter where they live within that capital region. And so, when we talk about that evidence that we're using to make these informed decisions to benefit that population within this area, how do we ensure that we have the effective data collection? So the information that you're receiving from these other municipalities, for example, they're going to have very different data collection mechanisms that we would have here at HRM. From a staffing perspective, many of these smaller municipalities are really struggling to recruit and retain planning and engineering staff. And so is there an opportunity then to even think about having more of a collaborative working model with some of these, especially along the border from a planning perspective? And I think Councillor Cuttle was speaking to that as well, to make sure that when they're making planning decisions and we're making planning decisions along that county line, that we're aligning with some of these really important things about active transportation, multimodal use. And last question for you. Are you coming to the Nova Scotia Federation Municipalities spring meeting? And is there an opportunity for other municipalities to learn a little bit more about what's happening? Because I'm guessing some of the other municipalities not within the stakeholder list are going to say, us too, me too. How do we get engaged and involved to increase our transportation equity? Thank you. Oh, I hit 0, sorry.
Through the chair, thank you, Councillor Lovelace. Let me try to tackle some of the questions. I may miss some, and I may be a little all over the place, so just bear with me. I'll not be able to attend the NSFM conference.
Okay.
The reason being is a good friend of mine is going into the hospital, and I'm going to look after things for him, so unfortunately we won't be there. But what I do know is that there's discussions already about the fall agenda, and having potentially a transportation theme as part of the agenda, of which we would certainly play a role in. You are correct that there is interest within other jurisdictions of the JRTA, and not just within Nova Scotia.
Right.
Within Atlantic Canada, the eyes are on this. In fact, if you speak to some of the academia in New Brunswick as an example, they're really interested in terms of the work they're doing, and they'd like to be involved in the work that they're doing.
Yeah.
In fact, they're looking at the JRTA and saying, good on you guys. Wish it was us. So that's the fall conference. Collaboration and planning, absolutely. So I don't know, I believe I'd mentioned that we had met with the administrative branch of the government, and we've extended an invite to the elected branch as well to discuss what the JRT is all about, and what the future role is of those 14, including HRM. You are right in that there are variations of capacity, but there's lots of thoughts and ideas in terms of what a regional transportation plan looks like. So we've met with all three. We'll be meeting where this is in advance. We'll be extending an invite for mid-May to bring them back for an additional discussion in terms of what the future role looks like, and how do we either formalize or have an informal structure in place whereby we can share thoughts, ideas, how they can be part and parcel. No different than HRM, the other 14 have to be part of this as well. So that's underway. How do we ensure we have the right data? I'm going to be honest with you, I don't think I'm qualified to respond to that, other than to say, we hired the best. And I think what's important for the JRTA, the board members of the JRT, the working group of the JRTA, and all the other members associated with, is to ensure that they take part in the public engagement sessions. 2, they ask good questions.
Yeah.
And if there's a missing, if they feel there's something missing, i.e. if Councillor Outhit felt that there should be a rail solution from Bedford and it's not part of there, has the right to ask that question.
Okay.
So we really want public interest in all aspects of this plan as we move forward. We've had preliminary discussions with the administrative staff of the Nova Scotia Utility Review Board, recognizing that there will be the need for legislative change. We have acts that date back to 1923 that if we don't start looking at the legislative framework now, what happens if you develop a regional transportation strategy and then realize, hold on now, we have some gaps or we have some challenges within the legislative framework?
Yes.
So we have to look at that.
Okay, good, good.
So yeah, that's the regulatory piece. We've engaged already with First Nations communities, and we're also working on an engagement strategy with African Nova Scotian communities as well,
Excellent.
which are really, really important.
Good.
With reference to the capital plan,
The 5-year.
I'll try to defend myself on this one. I was just responding to the 5-year capital plan
Okay.
in terms of the 100 Series Highway
Okay.
to Councillor Hensby. Interesting that it should move beyond. There are elements of this, though, if you think about the movement of goods. The movement of goods outside of Halifax to and from the various connections that will form part of this within our region. I've heard the stat, I don't know how accurate it is, but the port already has removed approximately 25% of truck traffic from downtown because of solutions dealing with rail. And here's what I will say. I had a brief opportunity to meet with some of the folks from the port. The Port of Halifax has a vision. This port it's destined for success
Yes.
if done right. And I'm quite confident with the people that I met with that it will be done right. And we have to develop the relationship with the port, with folks within PSA as an example, or Captain Alan Gray, who's on our board, in terms of helping them with their solutions. Truck traffic removed from downtown, and to divert containers from truck to rail is a solution. And then how that moves interprovincially, that's out of scope, but it certainly has an impact. And what inland ports look like, as an example. That's all part of the movement of goods. So there's lots to do. There's lots of people that we're discussing, collaborating with. And the last bit on the connector, the 113 connector, Councillor Cutler, we had the opportunity to meet, to your point, 6 weeks ago to let you know what we're going to do, recognizing that we are going to extend the EA for an additional 5 years until we figure out what the plan looks like. So I think that was very astute on our behalf to do that.
Thank you.
And, but we'll figure it out as we move forward. So, Tanya, anything else to add?
I'm good.
Okay.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank
Get
you.
to work.
Thank you, committee. Briefly from here, if I may, I think engagement, including talking individually to other councillors who aren't here, but routinely checking back in, soliciting or informing or, otherwise engaging with the Transportation Standing Committee is really good. I think collaboration is great. I think funding is better or has to happen part and parcel, and not so much for HRM, though obviously it's a concern for us, but when we go to those 14 other communities, like we're going to want to see things happen there and potentially have ambitions locally that could be really good, but their financial capacity is significantly lower. All of us struggle with when it comes to capital stuff, so I'm hoping this is mostly just stuff the province does, but there's going to be partnerships and there's going to be opportunities for us to work together, and funding is going to need to be there. The example to use in HRM is rapid transit, battery electric buses, and Burnside, probably that's gone up to $1 billion by now. I mean, we were at about $750 million before COVID and all the costs accelerated. So, getting to the level that a municipality is building rapid transit for the next generations requires provincial and federal investment. Nobody can do that on their own. No city does. So I look forward to having those conversations. And I think the other big piece that you can do, which is something they've done in Ontario and Quebec, is they have service standards for transit in Ontario and Quebec, especially in Ontario, that says you have, at this density, you can expect this kind of GO transit or this kind of rural municipal transit. And then it goes up, the more dense there is, the more transit you have. But there's also a bottom. There's a point below which they recognize that any kind of conventional transit doesn't work, and then you have to look at some other kind of point-to-point. It's more like you're subsidizing a taxi kind of service or something like that. And I think that's a big discussion we're having, is how do we get to, what are the best practices? Where can we do conventional transit? Where do we need a different solution? And then how are we going to pay for it? And I think that's a huge bit of your work. And I think that helping to facilitate us get to some kind of consensus is going to be awesome. I don't really have any questions. And at the interest of time, we've consumed an hour of a 2-hour meeting already. So nobody else is on the list. So I'd like to thank you both for coming. I really appreciate you taking the time today. And we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you. All right, so we're going to ask them to clear the position, and if I could ask the CNIB people, do you need assistance getting to the podium? You're here, Boyd's there to help you, so we're going to help get you all set up, and we'll just take 2 seconds, and then we'll proceed with the next presentation.
Louis, are we ready? Okay. Krista, I'm ready.
Yes, you're ready.
Okay.
You're ready to speak.
The microphone's on?
Yes.
Thank you.
We can all hear you. It's always a pleasure to see if you could introduce both yourself and your co-conspirator. And I look forward to your talk today. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my name is Milena Kazanavicius. I'm an individual who is completely blind. And I live in District 8, the best district there is, despite what Councillor Mason might say. My colleague here, my co-conspirator, the more calmer one and reserved one, is Mr. Louis Greco. He is officially with CNIB. He gets paid, I do not, but he'll buy me a beer after this. So as I mentioned, I am completely blind. And I'm here just to start the engines moving and thinking for all councillors all across the peninsula and HRM in particular about e-scooters. Last year, motor vehicles had updated their amendments, and so e-scooters are now legal. Great? Yes? No. Except for those of us who are pedestrians and are more than vulnerable on the streets. It is dangerous to be crossing any intersection right now. And Councillor Cleary's last month's statement, I won't repeat what he said about the drivers. It is also becoming increasingly dangerous to be walking on the sidewalks. One of the big problems is the e-scooters. Under the Provincial Act, the city, HRM, has the capacity and capability and the right to mandate what they want for bylaws. I'm going to give some of my lived experiences, and then after I do, Louis will present what the CNIB statement is. Last week alone, one of the companies, I'm aware of two, dropped a bunch of e-scooters off in District 8. Walking out of my building to relieve my brand new guide dog, Hope, who was just leashed when you're half asleep in the morning for anybody who has a dog, and so is she. Had it not been for my neighbor, I would have walked smack dab into an e-scooter parked outside my apartment building in the middle of a sidewalk. Nobody there. Okay? From last fall, I sent an email off to Mr. Lovely, David McIsaac, and Mark Neener. They're fully aware, and they've been very supportive. 6 incidents in the run of a week, and I'm going to give 3 examples. Yonge Street in front of Superstore, walking with the sighted friend of mine and my retired guide dog, Lewis. We had 2 e-scooters going above 32 kilometers an hour, at least that's what it felt like, speed right by us, terrified my sighted friend. She moved into me, and I toppled over and, almost landed on my guide dog. No helmets, nothing. We did manage to stop these 2 e-scooter riders and to ask why they were on the sidewalk. They were not aware. They did not know that they were not permitted there. No helmets, going quite fast, no understanding of how to use these machines. Second incident on North Street, leaving Java Blend by myself. Again, an e-scooter user zipped right by me on the sidewalk. At that point, my guide dog then dropped to the ground because it's scary and terrifying to have anything fast and moving behind a guide dog, anyone, elderly people who do not hear properly, the deaf and the hard of hearing, anybody. These machines are fast, okay? And the third incident, plain and simple, is that there was a woman up on Windsor Street. Keep in mind, I'm specifically talking about District 8, with her 6-year-old child, no helmets, riding these bicycles. Should I be concerned about this? Yes. I'm a citizen, and I don't want to be putting any more emergencies into our hospitals where our medical system is already broken. 32-kilometer speed limit under the Provincial Act. But you have the right and the law and the power to make this less. And this is what we will be asking for. No e-scooters on sidewalks. Keep them in the bike lanes, and I know the cyclists aren't going to like this, but we cannot have interferences upon the sidewalk, especially for vulnerable road users. I have sent through a letter from Jerry Post. Hopefully everybody here received that. He too has his own opinions, and you may contact him. And I also sent through an article from Paris, who has now banned the use of e-scooters throughout the city of Paris. Is that what we're looking for? Probably not. We want this environment saved. Let's change the culture and get people to stop using cars. But despite the fact that Paris put a 10-kilometer speed limit and all sorts of punishments and penalties, they had to ban it because they had 3 deaths and 496 injuries with the bringing in of e-scooters. That's a lot. And I don't think our medical system can handle that right now. End of my thought. I will bring it over to Mr. Louis Greco.
So thank you, thank you for the opportunity. As Melinda said, my name is Louis Greco. I work for the CNIB. I've been with the agency since 2011 in a variety of roles. I recently moved to Nova Scotia in 2020. Timing is everything, and I didn't get it right. I'm a person who's been blind all my life. I do use a guide dog, and I would consider myself an active pedestrian. The stories that Milena shared with you are things that CNIB hears all the time. I think it's obvious to anyone that navigating any sidewalk, any community is challenging at the best for people with sight loss and those of us who are blind. The question around e-scooters is something that has been on our radar for about 3 or 4 years. I've prepared some materials that's been shared with the committee, and I just want to point out 2 things. First of all, with the exception of the photo that Milena provided us, that's in the briefing material that we provided, all of those images were captured in jurisdictions where robust guidelines, cooperation and engagement with the operators of the rental devices had taken place. As Milena said, her example of Paris, where even though guidelines were in place, bad things happened to innocent people. yes, we would like to see, CNIB would like to see that municipalities didn't allow or blocked the deployment of rental e-scooters. Is that going to happen? Probably not. There's all kinds of advantages to the devices. I outlined some of them in the brief that I wrote, and I'm sure that you've heard them all before. The guidelines that we put forward, or the recommendations that CNIB have put forward are consistent with what we've said to other municipalities. If you are going to allow them, and we truly hope that you don't, but if you are, questions around speed, you have the jurisdictional authority to do that as set out by the recent amendments to the Transportation Act. Questions around parking, designated parking areas, in our view, are a must. These areas must be detectable by someone who's blind by using both high color contrast delineations and tactile markings, so that as you're navigating a sidewalk or a street, that you know that they're there. That when and where the designated parking spaces are created, that there's a minimum of 1.8 meters of navigable, unobstructed path of travel around it. And the reason it's 1.8 millimeters and not something less is that for someone walking either with a guide dog or with a sighted guide, where they're taking the person's elbow and walking with them, they can walk side by side comfortably and with dignity. The other probably equally important factor is that our research shows us that you can have two mobility devices, aka two wheelchairs, going in opposite directions, passing each other, and that 1.8 width would provide them, again, with a reasonably safe path of travel to navigate. Our fourth recommendation talks about the expectations that, or the guidelines that we would like the city to adopt. So when duly reported to a micromobility operator, expectations should be clearly established by HRM that prompt action is taken, okay, on the part of the provider. I'll skip number 5, and I just want to highlight number 6. We are going to be entering into a society of micromobility delivery devices. It's not on your radar yet. It should be. Thank you for the opportunity, and I'm glad to take any questions.
Thank you both so much. Flipping back to the, so I'll speak from here. I mean, what I'm most concerned about is that the Motor Vehicle Act has already been amended so that scooters are illegal on sidewalks. So what I will commit to you right now is that I will speak to the Chief of Police about getting some enforcement on that, because it's not fair that we're still having that discussion with you when it's already been determined they can't be on sidewalks. So I think both in terms of riders, that would be a police action, and then I will talk to Brad Anguish, who's the head of Public Works, who's sitting next to me up here, about what we can do in the very immediate term about scooters that are abandoned in the public right-of-way and left as tripping hazards in sidewalks. So we do have a speaker on the list. We'll go to Councillor Cuddle.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And thank you both for coming here today and speaking about this important issue. And Melina, it's nice to have you here. We've only spoken over the Zoom so far, so nice to have you here in person. Yeah, so I mean, this is a big issue. It's an issue that we've predicted, because it's happened in every other city that's adopted e-scooters. And to many of your points, those cities that were early adopters are now really reeling back on the use of e-scooters in their urban cores. And for us, there are a lot of lessons to be learned in that. There's no reason why we need to be repeating all the mistakes of other places. We should be, in fact, much more proactive in addressing them from the get-go. Just a couple questions. I don't know if there's some staff that can clarify this. It doesn't have a presentation. I just want to know if you've chosen vendors for the e-scooters. No.
The report hasn't come back to the committee or council yet, so we're not at that stage.
Right, okay, so that's, so I just wanted to comment on. I think many of these things might be able to be addressed when we actually have vendors who are going to be supplying this service. Right now, I still feel people are doing it on their own, and I have noted as well, e-scooters left in intersections, e-scooters left in the middle of the sidewalks, they've been fallen over, they've been standing upright, kind of all, I think they get to the end of the zone or their battery dies out, and I've seen them way out by the Rotary and beyond, and we don't really have the mechanisms to hold the folks accountable for that. So hopefully, once that report comes back to us and vendors are selected, we'll have much more ability to have better enforcement, because they'll have something to lose, right? They'll have their license to lose if this becomes an ongoing problem. And I also agree very much with what you say around the speed. They shouldn't be on sidewalks, and yet they are. And I don't think I've been to a city that has an e-scooter program where even when they're not allowed on the sidewalks, that you see them on the sidewalks, because you can't always control the riders, and even though they have the geo-gating and all these other mechanisms, I don't know how foolproof that is. So I think there's a lot of things we have to look at on our side if we're selecting a vendor for e-scooters in our city, really to look at the speed, and also make sure the checks and balances are there, so we don't have the issues of the e-scooters on the sidewalks, because they don't belong there for all the reasons that have been mentioned. So thanks again for coming and presenting your thoughts and ideas on this emerging issue. Thank you.
If either of you have anything you'd like to add at that point, you can just give me a wave and we'll turn your mic on, but if not, we have Councillor Hensby on the list. Go ahead. Yeah, absolutely.
So, do you want me to stand up?
Oh, your mic's alive there. You can stay right
Oh,
there.
the mic's right here?
Yeah.
I feel weird, the speakers are coming, I can't see, so I don't know where everybody is.
You can just have a seat.
Oh, you want me to sit? You see?
Yeah,
Somebody should hire him at CNIB.
Boyd is very
Probably
good.
won't
It's
get paid
true.
as much, though. No. Or give him a pay raise. Through Chair to Councillor Cuddle, very nice to see you here. Great to be in person, especially now that you're on Active Transportation Advisory Committee, as I am honored and humbled to be as well. So everything that Louis has said, and myself as well, and I had brought in a long white cane just to show as well. So this is somebody who would be also walking if they're completely blind or with very low sight, and detecting things on the ground. And I've heard from many of my colleagues who are white cane users that they are, their canes are getting stuck in the machines where they're left inappropriately, et cetera, et cetera. We did have a presentation, and I'm not sure if Councillor Cuddle, you were there, on ATAC, by a representative, that vendors can, and the city can implement quite a lot of technological restrictions on the machines. So for example, I am fully aware that the Halifax scooters, which are, I believe, functioning off of the waterfront, they're the black ones, I'm told, that once they approach the public gardens, that they automatically shut off, so you can no longer take them into public gardens. And, these machines have capacities and capabilities to do that. Is it all going to work? I'm still apt to say no, but the more we can do to protect our pedestrians, the better it will be. End of thought. Thank you.
Yeah. Well said. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hensby.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much for your presentation here today. And I can empathize with your concerns and stuff. Myself, I'm half blind, but I'm very cognizant and appreciative of the site I do have, but I'm very cognizant of the needs of those who don't have it. And I appreciate your presentations here today. I also believe that these e-scooters and stuff like that should be in the bike lanes as well. They should not be on the sidewalks. And I believe that all of them, even the cyclists, should also have bells on, because there are some cyclists out there that are disrespectful because they don't have a bell or use a bell when they're approaching anyone on streets or near the streets or on the sidewalk, whatever the case may be. So cyclists, e-scooters, anybody within these new lanes, they should need to share those lanes and leave the sidewalks for those pedestrians that are in need of them. My observation, though, about your cane, it doesn't look like a white cane to me. It looks more like a Nordic walking stick, so I'm not sure is that you may need to get a little more white paint on or more white reflective tape, but just making that observation that if I was driving along the side of the road, if you were walking by, I would not really notice that as a white cane per se, because of the black top on the top, the silver metal in the middle, and the red on the end, which I recognize. Yeah. Yeah, it's probably well used, but you might need to put a little more extra white reflective tape on it just to get it a little more noticeable. But it's just that I agree with your comments and concerns that were raised here today, and I'm looking forward to as these e-scooters roll out in our municipality that they do have the technology to have no-go zones in regards to, you mentioned about the public gardens. It could be one area they could be blocked from going. There's certain streets that could be blocked if we know there's going to be major corridors that are routinely used by those who are with limited eyesight, that perhaps certain areas can be coordinated off that the e-scooters cannot drive along. But as the technology unfolds and rolls out, hopefully that they'll look at the ways of having them restricted in certain areas to make it safer for everyone to enjoy our streets, either by car or by foot or by wheel or whatever the case may be. Thank you very much, and have yourself a pleasant day.
And with that, the list is done, and we thank you both so much for coming today. We really appreciate you taking the time to come and speak with us. Thank you both. Thank you very much. So that concludes presentations for today. And as you may recall, we moved public participation to now. So I would ask Dave Truman from the Halifax Cycle Coalition was on the list. If you give us a second to clear the area, we'll have you come up, and you can stand at the do you have a PowerPoint or? No, you can stand at the podium or sit, whichever you prefer. And we'll get your mic on, and you'll have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much for allowing me to address you today, Mr. Chair. I'm recently joined Halifax Cycling Coalition. In fact, recently returned to Halifax, having been in the Ontario wilderness for 12 years previous, after spending 20 years in Halifax prior to that. So we sent you a fairly long letter. As Mark Twain would say, I apologize for the long letter. We didn't have time to write you a shorter letter. So I will just emphasize a few key points in the few minutes that I have. We have some extremely good guidance documents in Halifax. The IMP, Integrated Mobility Plan, being the primary one, but certainly the Complete Streets guidelines as well, the design guidelines. So it's somewhat puzzling when we repeatedly see projects that don't follow the guidance that's in those excellent documents. And in particular, I'm referring to the supplementary staff report on extending the bike lanes on Almond Street. We would just ask that you ensure that recommendations from staff are explicitly following the inverted triangle of hierarchy. And I think it's interesting that we come right after CNIB. The first tier in that triangle is those who are walking. And you know, as people who ride bicycles, of course, we also walk. But you know, we very much, you know, notwithstanding, you know, some people that break all the rules, we do as a group very much respect the walkers, that they have priority. And so, that inverted triangle is all important. So when we look for, the Almond Street bike lanes, which were set out in the IMP in 2017, and we very much appreciate Councillors Cleary and Mason who have asked for, looking at options to extend those, that we should be looking not for car-centric approaches, but for bicycle-centric approaches. And really, the only acceptable means for those extensions east and west, given the narrow constraints of the road right-of-way, are for one-way traffic and one-way cycle lanes on each side. And so that's the option that we should be looking at. But we're also way, way behind schedule. This whole network spine should have been completed by 2022, and it's less than 50% completed in 2023. So we can't wait for 2 more years of study and analysis before we start with cycling-centric approaches to those extensions. And, even the original report that was approved by Council for Almond Street anticipated that in the future those extensions would happen. Well, it's 3 years since that approval, so the future is now. We should be building the proper facilities now. And one of the key observations is that section on Almond from Connolly westward to Connaught, it's already one way at rush hour because there are no left turns allowed in both rush hours off of Connaught onto Almond. So it's not a big change to make that one way all the time. And it's just that one block on Almond. And that solves a lot of problems. Cyclists need direct routes. We can't have, if we expect broad adoption and people, people on bicycles are in a rush just like people in cars. They need direct routes. So, overall, I just urge you to adhere only to the 3 options in the 3 tables that, respect the cycling first for those on-road segments and adopt the one-way traffic to allow that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Great to have you here. Thank you for stepping right up as soon as you got back. We appreciate that. There's no questions of clarification, so we're going to move on with the agenda. In case there's, so you're relieved of duty, sir. If there's anybody else, we do have public participation. The whole thing was moved up now. If there's anybody else in the audience who would like to speak, please come forward now. Anybody else who'd like to speak, please come forward. Third and final call, is there anyone else who'd like to speak? Seeing none, we'll call public participation closed, and we're now on to the meat of the matter is staff reports 12.1.1, traffic diversion short and long-term closures. Lucas Pitts, please come forward. Is there a presentation? No? Oh, all right. Someone put the motion on the floor, please. Councillor Cleary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Happy to move that the Transportation Standing Committee recommend that Halifax Regional Council direct the Chief Administrative Officer to draft amendments to S300, the streets bylaw, to provide a clear process for requests for short or long-term road closures on municipally owned roads within business improvement districts as outlined in the staff report dated April 24, 2023.
Moved by Councillor Cleary, seconded by Councillor Lovelace. Councillor Cleary, do you have anything on this?
Just, I guess, a couple of questions just around the process, and I appreciate this, and I think this is great. I also learned a little bit, because when I went into the Motor Vehicle Act, it had never been so plainly made clear to me that it actually says council designs roads. And so I'm going to keep that in mind next time plans come forward and the recommendation is X, and I'm like, no, council is going to design that. Anyway, I'm sure there are legal requirements why you have to have the ring on to stamp the plan. So in terms of the process, one of the things that I was curious about, and part of me completely understands why you'd want to have 100% people agree in a particular area to close it down for an activity. But then the other part of me, knowing how people are, and, humans can be fickle sometimes, and it might not have anything to do with the project. Maybe I'm a business owner that's upset at the executive director of the Business Improvement Association. Could be any number of things why I might say no. So I appreciate the fact that it also says, but even if you don't get the 100%, you could still, the wording is interesting, appeal to the engineer. And so I guess, are we going to allow, say, a group, whether it's Quinpool or Gottingen, Agricola, it doesn't matter, group of people get together and say, look, we want to, for this Sunday, close this portion. 99% of businesses on that portion of street agree. However, they can still make the application. What is the expectation? They would just indicate why not all businesses agreed and what the rationale or the case might be still, even though maybe not everyone agrees?
Lucas Pitts, Director of Traffic Management, through the chair. Yes, great question, and that would be the intent. We just wanted to create that, so the door was still open in those cases where it was a rare circumstance. We debated a lot whether to go with the 100% for the points you just eloquently made. We did go with the 100% though because, this stemmed a lot out of the we'll call it the incident around closure of Bedford Row last year. And we didn't want staff to be in the middle of trying to debate whether a closure is going to be harmful to a business. And so that's why we went with the 100% with the ability to appeal to the engineer. And then once that's done, appeal to council.
Right. And I was just going to mention that. So the appeal to council, or in our case, because it's not clear in the staff report, but would that be the appeals committee? Is that the committee you're thinking of? Because it says you can appeal to council, or if they have a committee set up, or would that be a committee specifically just for these closures? I wasn't quite clear if it was council or a committee that you could appeal to, that council empowered in this way. So is that the thinking, the appeals committee, or would that be a committee we set up?
It's under the charter, so it would go to the appeals committee,
Okay.
not at a separate committee.
So then, if it becomes a, in quotes, political kind of discussion, then engineer says no, Business Improvement District can say, well, please, council, consider. And then we would actually be able to override the engineer in that particular case and say, no, you know what, you should close that, or vice versa. You agree to it, and then we hear from a lot of people saying, don't. That's kind of the thinking behind that?
That's correct. I mean, we've discussed this lots. In terms of a street closure, I mean, there might be some traffic implications. There's rarely going to be any real safety issues that come up in terms of a street closure. It really is around the decision of, if we can't get 100% and we have to make a decision about whether we're going to hurt a business that is opposing the closure, that decision should rest with council.
Right. Because we're best able to deal with that. As the budget discussion proved.
Your humor is appreciated. I will speak from the chair, if I may. My question for you, Lucas, is this doesn't in any way take away council's ability to decide to do pilot projects or to change the way a street works. This is if it's requested by the businesses, the bid, or the community. But, so what worried me about this is probably, I'm not going to name the business, but there is one business that would have been against the pilot on Agricola and then would have been against, or on Argyle Street, and would have been against doing Argyle Street. And ultimately, they now love it. So I feel like this is going to take away council's ability based on our economic plan and all the strategic plans to still say we're willing to do an experiment here and then go to a build if that's successful?
Absolutely correct. Yes, council can or committee can direct us in any which way or shape or form to close the street for whatever reasons, and we would follow through with that guidance. This is, as you said, specifically for the case where somebody else, in this case a business improvement area or bid, wants to experiment with a street closure. It's a great opportunity for essentially doing an experiment. And I go back to Bedford Row, is that if everybody gets on board and the BIA comes back and says, we want to do this, and we have a plan, and then it works out for a couple of years, it might be something of interest to council just to do permanently every summer, and then they don't have to come back anymore.
Thank you for that. And I guess I'll just say from here, every streetscaping we've done in the last 10 years has had a pilot project. where we've moved things back and forth and experimented and figured out the geometry and all that stuff. So one of the issues, I'm just going to say for the record, it's unfortunate what happened at Bedford Row, because I feel like there's some hope from some of the businesses there that they could skip straight to a permanent installation. And I don't think we're ever going to get to a permanent installation if we can't at least get to an agreement on doing a couple of pilots and figuring it out, right? Especially with the concern about the one business that would be most impacted. So I think we all have to come to the table and recognize that we're not going to jump straight to spending $5 or $10 million on a street. We need to, do wood planking and picnic tables and Jersey barricades and see how it goes. So I hope that this helps clarify. We want people on board, but I just wanted to put that stake in the ground that. I would love to see something happen on Bedford Row, but nothing permanent's going to happen until we can pilot it for another couple of years. Thank you. Councillor Cleary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question around kind of as you're developing the amendments to the streets bylaw and creating this process, you have to have a plan. It's got to show the fire lane. It's got to show all those things. And you have to show kind of the end and the beginning of the closure. Some potential closures, not saying they would, but I'm thinking of something like Quinpool Road, where you've got, maximum of 4 lanes, usually on the weekend. I can't imagine they close it on a weekday. Parking on both sides, so they may have to limit that sort of thing. But it's also an ambulance route and a fire route. And so as you're doing your analysis, would you go back to them and say, well, you can't close it at that intersection. It's got to be much further down. We need bigger signage. We have to, put out a public service announcement because that's going to be a massive. Will there be that kind of back and forth with the applicant? And also, if there are any costs associated, because some of that might actually end up costing the municipality, would we then charge fees back to the applicant and say, well, if you're going to do this, you're going to have police at this intersection. You're going to have to do, and, is it going to be iterative, and is it also going to be reflective of the costs, or would there be a plan that maybe we could absorb that? I guess we have to stand up a program to absorb that kind of thing. So, some of these closures might be very easy, do it on the back of a napkin. Others might actually require a fair bit of planning.
Through the chair, yeah. The language that we've mostly already prepared it all, the streets bylaw should be in front of council in May, does state that in the event of complications that the engineer can request anything of the applicant, and that we can have a process of working through those issues. Our intent is to pass the costs on to any applicant unless council gives us direction otherwise. And we do want to maintain, obviously, as you mentioned, we have a specific line to about emergency services and maintaining access and things like that. So,
okay, thank you.
I think we're no further speakers on the list, so if someone would care to call the question. Question's been called. All those in favor? Opposed? Carries. Thank you very much. Brings us to 12.1.2, extension options for Almond Street Bikeway. Is there a presentation with this one? No? All right. Who wants to put the motion on the floor? We'll go to Councillor Cuddle.
All right. I move that the Transportation Standing Committee recommend that Halifax Regional Council, 1, direct the Chief Administrative Officer to monitor and evaluate use of the approved all ages and abilities east-west cycling corridor across the north end of Halifax Peninsula for a minimum of 2 years post-implementation, and provide an update to the Transportation Standing Committee by 2026. And 2, direct the Chief Administrative Officer to initiate a functional planning process to evaluate options to provide an all-ages abilities cycling connection from Almond Street at Agricola Street to Gottingen Street as described in Table 1 of the discussion section of the staff report dated April 19th, 2023.
Moved and seconded. Councillor Cuddle.
Yeah, I don't
That's
have,
it? All right.
I don't have a, I'm glad to see that this is here, that this, especially the section between Agricola, looking at the options for that section between Agricola and Gottingen, 'cause I know that's been a bit of a troubling spot in how we make that work. So, it'd be great to have a functional planning process there. Otherwise, I'm just very excited to see the Almond Street Bikeway continuing to move forward here.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cuttle. Councillor Cleary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Also glad to see this, although, and I certainly don't want it to demean or embarrass staff, but, you know, I asked for a report on options, including a one-way, 14 months ago, and 14 months later, I'm getting a report back that says, well, we're going to look at some more options, but you guys got to talk some more about it, decide what you want to do, and then we'll look at the one-way street later when we do a thing. And I was like, kind of hoping in that 14 months, the thing would have happened. And we would have had the sort of bigger network analysis of what one way would mean to the thing. And, you know, I understand the frustration for folks from the Halifax Cycling Coalition to come and say, you know, why is it taking so long? So, I mean, part of me says, you know what, let's defeat this, let's put the alternative on the floor and say, well, let's do that analysis now, the functional plan. Because I thought that would happen over the last 14 months. So I guess just from a practical point of view, if we did defeat this and go with alternative one, well, that's unbudgeted. So, you know, it would have been great to get this a couple months ago. We could stick it in the budget. Is there 50 to 100 grand in the budget to do a functional plan if committee decides to send this to council to say, well, let's do it now instead of waiting 2 years?
I see Mark and Dave. Please go ahead.
Hi.
Introduce yourself for the record.
Mark Neener, Active Transportation Planner with Public Works. Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor. Yes, as described in the financial implications of the report, we do have funding allocated for planning and design work, and we could fund the functional plan that you described.
And we could do that before 2024? Because in the recommendation and the timeline laid out, under the current recommendation is to do this and have it ready for late 2024, early 2025. What's the timeline if we go with alternative one, say, do the functional plan now?
David McIsaac, manager of the Active Transportation Program, through Mr. Chair to the committee. My main concern with that is just staff capacity and within our group to do that work in that timeline, and the availability of staff in other groups who would have to contribute to that process. You know, we're trying to get Liverpool installed. We're trying to finish up a number of other functional plans this year for the Regional Centre AAA network. So, you know, we typically, you know, it's not a challenge to have money in our budget to hire consultants to do design. It is a really significant challenge in terms of staff time relative to all the other priorities to kind of put this on the table and to prioritize that. We would have to figure out what we don't do if we do decide to go back and look at Almond Street west of Windsor in the short term.
So it's not really an alternative one.
Well, you know, look, it is an alternative, but I'm just letting you know, there will be things that we don't do that are also been identified as priorities for council if we do that. It's always an alternative.
Yeah. You know what? There's other people on the board. I'll think about this for a little while.
Thank you, Councillor Cleary. We'll go to Councillor Purdy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just for clarification on what Councillor Cleary was asking for, because we've got tables and then options within the tables. So is he talking about the recommendation at the very end of the report, recommendation 1 versus recommendation 2? He's not talking to his colleague right now, so, okay. So I was just wondering if I could have clarification on that, which is the option 1 in the recommendations at the end of the report. And I just have some questions, not to be a contrarian, although I guess it's going to come across that way. For the data that was in this report, there was bicycles counted and then cars counted, the ratio of like 89 bikes to 149 bikes a day versus, you know, up to 10,000 vehicles a day along this stretch of road. is there data for bicycle vehicle collisions, like focusing on the safety aspect? Like what is the risk to a cyclist on this stretch of road? Like, do we have numbers on that? Some of the concerns in the implications, some of the comments to the options that are presented are, removing on-street parking, treed boulevards, no option to replace trees on the same street segment. The one-way traffic could mean it might not even be feasible. So it would require a network level analysis of potential impacts. Removing mature trees along some of these boulevards with no option for replacement. So these are concerns, and we hear, at least we hear in the public that, these are concerns that people are concerned about. Understanding the need to change, transportation options, but at the same time, I feel like it has to make sense to our people who are commuting and need to drive. Transit is not a good option for various reasons at this point in time. So making our streets even more complicated when we don't have good options. I mean, we hear this over and over again in our discussions. Just, is this the right thing to do at this time, I guess? So I guess my questions are the data for collisions. Do we have that? And the option that Councillor Cleary was asking, is it one of the tables with the options, or is it under the recommendation at the end of the report? I'm just wondering what we're talking about.
Through you, Chair, to the councillor, thanks for the questions. So I think Councillor Cleary's suggestion or consideration was to defeat the recommendations from staff and instead go with the first alternate recommendation, which would be to do a functional plan for extending the protected bikeways east of Agricola Street and west of Windsor. Whereas the staff recommendation at this point is just to do that functional planning for the extension east of Agricola.
Okay. Thank you.
In terms of the collision data, HM does have access to collision data, vehicle collision data, vehicle pedestrian collision data. I'm actually not aware at this point of any bicycle collisions along this corridor. That's something that I'd have to look into and report back. The recommended facility types, the protected bikeways that we're looking at for this corridor are appropriate for this type of street as per the professional guidance because of the high volumes of traffic and the truck traffic and the speeds of the traffic. So that's how we arrive at this, for the approved Almond Street project between Windsor and Agricola, that's how we ended up with a recommendation to build a protected bikeway.
Okay, thank you. No, I appreciate that. On one hand, I see the vision and the AAA network. Yes, yes, but on the other hand, is it working? Is it going to work for the drivers in our huge municipality who have to come downtown? And okay, thank you. I'll see what others have to say too.
Councillor Etters.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, gents, for being here. Following up on where Councillor Cleary is, Councillor Cleary is still thinking over there. I can see the smoke rising. The alternate would mean that something else gets delayed. Okay, we don't know what that something else is, and we don't know the importance or the ranking of that something else. So we're kind of flying blind on this decision a little bit here, and that's a very bad choice of words, and I'm sorry, based on earlier today. But could you give us a hint of what might suffer or what might be de-emphasized? I mean, it's tough, but it's sort of, we're making a decision to delay something in favor of something else, but we don't know what that thing is that we might delay is.
Excuse me, through Mr. Chair to the councillor, I can't, be specific. We are working on Regional Centre AAA Bikeway Network. We have staff time to go to that. We're going hard on rural sidewalks now. We have a whole set of projects that we are about to start planning and implementing in suburban HRM. So it's, and we are already in the process of implementing what council has already directed us to do in terms of a AAA bikeway network between Windsor Street and Kenai. So it's, sorry I can't be more specific, but that's just the reality of the situation.
But does it make more sense to do this at the same time, though, as the other part of Almond? Is there sort of economies of scale there, you know what I mean? It's like when we're well, I'll pick on Ed here, when we're paving Street A, we pay over here, or do we pave the one around the corner, sort of? Is there an argument for that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair comment. We will be doing that work over there, but but it would pull from other work.
Yeah,
for sure.
no, fair enough. And I mean, you have to tell us that, so it's fine. I don't know, Brad, if you have any thoughts on advice on that, on what your priorities? I love putting you on the spot at least once a meeting. So.
It's okay. The other piece that's a reality is we're down a couple AT planners right now as well.
Yeah,
so
I
apologize we didn't go through the exercise of figuring out exactly what it would be, but I can tell you right now it'd have to be a project that isn't, that doesn't have external funding. That's what would go. It'd be a community project of some description, and quite frankly, because of the breadth of the AT portfolio, I can't even tell you if that's going to take out a road project right now, right? So, because our AT planners work across a number of areas, and so, but if council would like us to go away and come back with that consequence, or absolutely, we can do that, if that would be the preference, to understand what that would be. I would just say that the environment is so fluid right now for us. Even lining up on projects where we need permitting. Look at the federal strike, for example. That's now starting to show up in some of the permitting we need for projects. It's just very fluid, and so it's very hard for us to be exact. This is exactly what comes in and what goes out, but certainly what we can guarantee is we'll follow the direction of council and execute on that functional plan if you tell us to do so, and make it a priority.
All right, well, I appreciate it. I mean, I asked a frank question, I got a frank answer, and I appreciate that, and we'll see what others have to say. Thanks, Brad. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Oathett. I'm going to speak from here if I may, and then we'll go to people for second round. Oh, we'll go to Councillor Cuttle first. I saw that happen. We're good. So it's vexing, right, that Almond Street is the only street in the North End that goes all the way east and west that we want. There are impediments on the west side in that the grade is greater there than it is on Liverpool slightly. I've had some cyclists say quite rightly, slightly, not that much, right? And also, ever since I learned about cutting through to Allen Oak through First Street and all that and Armcrest, I don't go that way anymore anyway. But it is vexing to me that we're still talking about this when, connecting the base across all the north-south bike lanes and connecting it to George Dauphiny and through that to the Bears Road multi-use path has been an ambition we've had for a long time. That being said, doing one doesn't preclude doing the other, right? If we put bump outs and a little bit of tactical bump outs and a little bit of speed humps on, I guess it's Liverpool, while we're working on a functional plan still to do Almond Street. I'd make it one way. Just to be clear, I'd make it one way. I don't think that's a big deal. We have made it, everything I've ever read about this says, the people-powered vehicles need to have a direct route as much as possible. And that, it's a lot easier for someone who can put down their foot on the pedal and put a little more gas in the engine or whatever to go up a different road and take a different path. So I do that in a heartbeat. I'm just concerned, is that going to happen anytime soon in our work plan, or should we be pursuing a local street bikeway on Liverpool and on Bloomfield? But At the other end, I just want to be clear, it was a huge deal for the traffic patterns and the congestion that makes cars slower and people being frustrated, and even the pedestrian experience when the Canadian Forces Base moved the entrance to align with Almond Street on Gottingen. Like, that was actually a huge improvement up there. And then to make that section one way, I think would be problematic in a huge way. But I do think that if we strip the parking off and we had seasonal bollards like we have in some parts of Wise Road, like, is that possible there? Can we do speed tables at the intersections at the crosswalks and slow the cars down and make it a more comfortable route to share? Like, what are the options to be creative? Or is there really no way to put bikes there and maintain two-way traffic? And this would kill me because it'd take the parking away in front of Shige when I go to get sushi. So I know that would be really bad for them. But like, the priority is that we have a single street, east-west corridor. There's no other options. We've been having these conversations the entire time I've been here. Where else are we going to put it? There's no other street that goes that whole stretch. So I'm inclined to feel like we're missing the mark and to agree with our friends from the Halifax Cycle Coalition. So on the west side, I feel quite convinced that we should just go with the alternative. On the east side, I'd like staff to kind of like what are the, can you recap the lane widths, and like, there is no art to possible here, is there?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. By my best estimate, and with guidance from my colleagues, there is insufficient space on Almond Street between Agricola and Gottingen to even add painted bike lanes and maintain two directions of traffic for vehicles. It would require very narrow traffic lane widths, far below our standards.
Okay, well, we'll keep that in mind as we continue the discussion. I just want to close and say to Councilor Purdy. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I mean, as per one of the options in the table, we could explore raised protected bike lanes if we were willing to basically reconfigure the street from building facade to building facade. So, remove the utility poles, underground the utilities, take that space and make use of every inch of space from property line to property line.
I'm having a unique challenge I've never had before in the job, where I'm trying to keep a straight face while your boss is literally laughing over here. That's like a $4 or $5 million build. Like, I know from the undergrounding North Park power at the roundabouts was $3.5 million of a $12 million job. So I know that is non-trivial. I'll just close by saying, on the peninsula, 70% of people walk and bike to work. 80% of kids walk to school, and 10% in the areas around Almond Street actually bike to work. They bike to work. We know that from StatScan. So it's a little different, I think, from out in Coal Harbour. Like, we have heavy usage, and we believe we can drive that usage up. But what we hear over and over again from people is, I'd feel safer biking to work or biking with my kids to school if there were protected bike lanes, which is what this is all about. So we got to do this. There's no doubt in my mind, like, we can do much better than we're already doing, which is quite good for a small city. But we need to make those investments. So I'm just worried about making the wrong investment here is my only concern. So we're going to go to Councillor Cuttle, who's dropped off the list, and then we'll go to Councillor Purdy.
Thank you. So I'm just looking at the differences between the recommendation and alternative one, just, in our discussion here. And in alternative one, it essentially says that, you'll initiate a functional planning process to develop and evaluate options, and you'll return with recommended options. And in the recommendation, it's about options. I'm just wondering, is it just the timeline between the recommendation and alternative one that we're talking about, or what are the big differences between the recommendation and alternative one?
Through you, Chair. The difference is the scope of the planning project and the resources that would go into it, and likely the timeline. The western segment, especially the consideration to to convert Almond to one-way traffic, would require a network level analysis of what those changes, would sort of mean for the vehicle network on the peninsula. or in that part of the peninsula. So I think the difference is, yeah, scope and timeline for the project.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Purdy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And my question was, in the recommendation that we have here in the motion, so the 2-year post-implementation report, I guess, coming back, that's for the non-permanent structures, like to try it out. Is that, am I understanding that correctly? Before the permanent changes are made?
Through you, Chair. No, not exactly. So we have 2 approved projects right now. The first being the permanent installation of the protected bikeway on Almond between Windsor and Agricola Street. And then that project includes shared lanes from Agricola to Gottingen on Almond Street. And then we have the approved West End Local Street Bikeway, which would use Liverpool Street as a local street bikeway to make that connection down to Connaught and through a multi-use pathway to George Dauphiny Ave. So that Liverpool project is already approved. We've already begun implementing it. Some elements were installed last year. And there's actually a mini neighborhood roundabout going in at the intersection of Liverpool and Dublin as we speak, and those are permanent changes. So the proposal is to complete construction of these 2 approved projects, which, together combined do provide an east-west cycling connection across the north end of the peninsula. So the recommendation is to complete construction of those facilities and then monitor and evaluate the use of them for, approximately 2 years before we report back.
Okay, so these are already happening in the works.
Correct.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Okay, next up on the list is back to Councillor Cleary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to sort of following up on where Councillor Purdy was in actually Councillor Connell, sorry, and your answer about some of the other stuff. So the recommendation is go and do the Liverpool Local Street Bikeway. We're going to do Almond, and we're going to study Almond from Agricola to Gottingen. Back burner, well, way later, look at the western part, but that'll be like 24, 25. If alternative 1 goes, then we start looking at that western side sooner rather than later, change the scope. We're down to AT planners. There's this, and I don't, Oak is happening this summer, right? Yeah, okay. Because if you were going to nod, shake your head, I was like going to burn this whole place down. So, I mean, we got Liverpool happening.
We could keep it parliamentary there, Mr.
I know,
Cleary.
So we only do one of 2 ways. We go all the way or we burn it down. And so, I don't want any of that to stop because we've been waiting forever to get that. Oak, Allen was done pre-pandemic. The Oak-Allen-Oxford intersection was done 2 years ago. So getting Oak-Allen finished is really, in my mind, not just because it's my neighborhood, but in my mind, is critical to that east-west connection in the sort of central western part of the peninsula. To Councillor Mason's point, this is critical as well. And as it pains me to do this, I'm going to support the recommendation, but I'm going to ask for a supplementary report, and I'm working on the wording right now, so sorry, Krista. What I'd like to know is, what is the implication if we start a functional plan on the western side sooner to what your plans are? I don't want to derail anything right now that is going to help us or take away that 25 million we're trying to burn through, because we got to get that money spent. I also don't want to stop any of the other stuff you guys are working on, especially if you're short-staffed. But what I would like to know is, let's go ahead with what we got. what are the implications if we started the functional plan on the western side sooner? So that would be the Windsor to Connaught. I'm less fussed about Connaught to George Dauphiny, shared's fine. But that section, we really need to figure this out, and we need to figure out what the network implications are for doing a one-way. Because frankly, to Councillor Mason's point, this has got to be done at some point. We need protected, safe bike infrastructure east-west in the northwestern part of the peninsula. This is the only way you're going to get it, is Almond Street. And so we got to figure out how that's going to work. So I'm looking to see, I don't know what the report would be, but supplementary report on the implications of starting the functional plan and network analysis on Almond, Windsor to Connaught sooner rather than later.
That last part is definitely not right. So using the language from the alternatives, I think what you're doing is you're amending it to say, as a third item, direct the Chief Administrative Officer to initiate a functional planning process to further develop and evaluate options to extend the approved Almond Street protected bike lanes west of Windsor Street to George Dauphiny Avenue and return to Transportation Standing Committee with recommended options.
Yes, and not as a directive, but as a supplementary report on what the implications of that would be.
So, okay, let's have a little quick talk with staff. So that wouldn't be to initiate a functional planning process. That would be to come back with.
Tell us what the implications.
Is there any value in bringing a supplementary report when we already have this report in front of us? Like, would it be any different from what we have here? I guess is the big question.
Could the motion go up on the screen?
Yeah.
Yeah, through Mr. Chair, just a quick clarification, it's the implications to like our work program? Yeah.
Do you want the current motion, or do you want?
No, I'm sending you what Cleary just said, sort of. Your email or Ian's email?
It's on your screen. Do you want it up there?
Audience can see it. Perfect. So the question is, are we initiating a functional planning process? Are we asking for a supplementary report regarding initiating a functional planning process? And would that supplementary report be any different from the report we have in front of us right now that already outlines all these issues? It sounds like I'm being glib, but that is literally the nub of it. How would that report be different from just saying, continue with everything you have planned, but come back with a functional plan for this? That means you can still fit it into your work plan over the next couple of years, but it means that we've decided we're going to do that.
Yeah, I think that's a good summary of the situation. I mean, yeah, I'm struggling with this. I guess, a supplementary report, as I'm interpreting it, would come back with information on, what we would set aside in order to work on, which, at this stage of the game, I don't know, sitting here, how exact we could be on that, to be quite honest with you. I mean, for us, it's about council setting priorities. If we leave this meeting with you, telling us that it is a priority, we would find a way to fit it in. I just don't know exactly how long it would take right now without looking at the work plan and what would come off. Or be delayed, really.
That's the answers I was looking for. That's why I wanted it as a supplementary report, because the recommendation from staff is, let's do the functional plan from Agricola to Gottingen. That's in the motion. Let's go ahead with it. The supplementary report, based on the feedback that we were getting, is, well, if you wanted us to do the western side from Windsor to Connaught, that could throw some stuff out the window. What I want back in the supplementary report is, what's the stuff that would go out the window? Because maybe we prioritize and say, well, this is more important than that other stuff.
Okay, so does the amendment or does the motion as amended by Krista, based on what we've been saying, does that work for you?
on the, I wouldn't say prepare a supplementary report on the initiation, on the implications of the initiation of a functional plan from, on Almond Street, from
That's all there.
Windsor to, it says George Daphne, but Connaught is fine, but whatever.
Well,
Yeah, I would say
because we're going to
Connaught.
do, yeah, that's, no one's
'Cause that's
arguing
what I
about that. Somebody spell Connaught for us.
Connaught, named after the Duke, who was also the Prince.
Go ahead. We have a question from the director.
I just have a question. I'm worried about losing time and the time it takes to generate a report. So I'm kind of looking, and yeah, that's where I'm kind of at. Something less formal where we just come back and give you a verbal report of what the implications are. So
I'm fine with that.
Right? So that doesn't require all the dressing, timing, approvals, and everything else, so we can be nimble. We get back here, we give you the impacts, so that is leading me towards, we defer this today to the, yeah, right, to the next meeting. Sorry, and I don't have the formal stuff in my head either, so.
Defer the motion on the floor and direct the chief administrative officer to prepare a briefing note on the implications, da, 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 da.
Yeah.
Moved by Councillor Cleary, seconded by Councillor Out. The motion is on your screen. Are there any further?
So we're deferring this whole item. Are there implications to deferring the go, no-go on what you're doing now?
Just got to
We'll
know.
just keep going.
Okay.
Yeah, we didn't hear anything that said stop all engines, so.
Okay, so questions been called on the amendment. There's none on the speakers list. All those in favor of the deferral, sorry. So we'll be deferring this and that will end discussion on the item. All those in favor of the deferral?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries unanimously. Thank you very much, committee. Moving on to, and thank you, staff, for putting up with a very robust dialogue up here. Moving on to 12.2.1, free transit during car-free day. Councillor Cuddle.
There we go. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I would like to move that the Active Transportation Advisory Committee recommend that the Transportation Standing Committee direct the Chief Administrative Officer to prepare a staff report on providing free transit during Car-Free Day.
Moved by Councillor Cuddle, seconded by Councillor Cleary. Anything further, Councillor Cuddle?
Yeah, I'll just give a bit of background on this, and thank you, Councillor Cleary. At the April 20th meeting of the Active Transit Advisory Committee, we got an update from staff on, current education outreach initiatives and opportunities. And one of those initiatives that was brought forward was Car-Free Day. I thought we'd been doing this for years, but apparently not. I think residents might celebrate Car-Free Day, but as the municipality, we haven't actually done a formal program around it. So this will be a new initiative for us. Car-Free Day is celebrated internationally on September 22nd, 2023. In the discussions at the committee, we talked about how nice it would be to have free transit on Car-Free Day, and hence here we are. The main goal of Car-Free Day is to encourage people to try sustainable modes of transportation and leave their car at home to reduce air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions. From HRM, promoting Car-Free Day is part of our transportation demand management, education, and promotion activities. And staff are still exploring if and how HRM celebrates Car-Free Day. And in support of this, the Active Transportation Advisory Committee is asking the Transportation Standing Committee for a staff report on providing free transit on Car-Free Day. Just to note that when we did free transit Fridays last summer, bus boardings increased by around 7,000 boardings daily, an increase of 9%, and 31% increase, or 2,700 boardings on the ferries. But it is the bus increase that I was most impressed with. I mean, that's a significant increase. So it just seems right that if we're going to celebrate Car-Free Day, that perhaps we look at offering free transit. It fits with the campaign. Based on past success, it could be encouraging new ridership and support some of our broader goals of increasing transit ridership and getting people to try new things.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cuttle. Councillor Outthit.
Thank you, Chair, and I will support this. I'm always worried, though, about taking any more revenue away from transit when they're kind of bleeding revenue to begin with. But I think it's the right thing to do to try to practice what we preach, I guess, with this day and also try and increase ridership. The motion doesn't make sense to me. We're moving that the Active Transport Committee recommend something. Yeah, so I think we need to figure this out somehow. We need a motion that this committee recommends to council, right? Or that we recommend to the CAO. But there's something wrong in that first sentence there. Yeah.
So we'll let the motion read, good note. The motion will just read, Transportation Standing Committee direct the Chief Administrative Officer to direct staff regarding free
Yeah, and I'll support
day.
that. Yeah.
Councillor Cleary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wonder if it's considered friendly if we add on after Car Free Day, comma, and in the staff report, so it would be providing transit, free transit, I'm just reading what was here, I want to make sure I'm grammatically correct, and encourage walking and cycling, because when I think about Car Free Day, it's not just about transit, but it's AT and transit is part of that. And people may or may not know this. I looked through old media releases for the city, and back in 2002, there was an Atlantic challenge that HRM put out a press release. This is from Sheila Fougier and Peter Kelly, believe it or not, that we celebrate Car Free Day. This was April back then, Thursday, April 25th. And we were vying against Fredericton and Corner Brook, Newfoundland, odd bedfellows, to see who would be the best. And people had to, but were encouraged to call in, register, so that we could actually have a number of people. And each of the cities were competing in who had the most car-free folks that day. And so anyway, I think it's important to look at the walking and the cycling as well as the free transit, because there may be other things we do that we could encourage that car-free experience for people that day.
So while I appreciate everything you're saying, I'm feeling like that's out of order, because what this is a request for the CEO to come up with a report to potentially fund something, rather than a request to direct the CAO to come up with a plan to promote Car Free Day. So we'd have to completely rewrite the report. Like, I feel like the motion didn't go that far. Not to say you're wrong, but just technically, parliamentarily, I don't think that's. I don't think that is in keeping with it.
I'm gonna disagree with you.
All right. Well, you know what? If it's not friendly, we'll go to Councillor Cuttle for a couple of words here.
Yeah, so they're already looking at if and how we do the Car Free campaign as part of our education and outreach program. So the group doing transportation to demand management and active transit, so Eliza Jackson and crew. So this was specific, we're already doing that. This is specific in that they don't have the authority to make transit free. So we're really looking at just the free transit piece to see if we can add that to the campaign.
So with that, so we have a motion to amend potentially, Councillor Cleary, or do you want to withdraw?
If that's already happening, that'd be great.
Okay, so amendments withdrawn. There's nobody else on the list. All those in opposed? Carries. Perfect. There are no members of standing committee reports, no motions, no in camera, no added items. Notices of motion. Seeing none. We've done public participation. The date of the next meeting is May 18th, 2023. I'll take a motion to adjourn from Councillor Purdy, as per practice. We are adjourned. Thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you on May 18th.